This is Captain Kuro, the second smartest person in all of the East Blue, capable of conjuring 100 master plans in his mind brain faster than you can conjure a single thought of what you might want for dinner. But Captain Kuro has a big secret, one that surprisingly few people pick up on, and it's going to play a big part in this video because we are on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the controversial Captain Kuro. So this is going to be a good one, because Kuro is such a weird villain. He has a lot of great ideas with, questionable execution. So let's start with our standard criteria for a good villain, which is threat. Captain Kuro was the main antagonist of the Syrup Village arc, and when it comes to threat level, Kuro he's a bit of a tricky turnip, because he comes at a weird time in One Piece. He's a very middling threat because he comes after our introduction to the world, but before the stakes get properly serious. And I think that his bounty is a great illustration of that. Captain Kuro isn't a big step up from Buggy. Buggy's bounty was 15 million berries, and when meeting Kuro, he's 16 million. So as an audience member, it's almost like, what's even the point? This guy can't be too much more trouble than the clown we already beat. And you're right, because he wasn't. However, Kuro's bounty is a matter of some controversy. It's generally accepted to be 16 million berries, but in the anime, that amount seems to change a lot. For example, in episode 45, we see Kuro's crossed off bounty, which lists 14 million berries, and in One Piece Stampede, for whatever reason, Kuro's bounty is featured in Buena Festa's bounty collage, but it has him listed as 15 million. And my only possible conclusion for these inconsistencies is that the anime staff simply did not care enough about Kuro to double check the canon number, because this hasn't happened with any other East Blue villain. Nobody ever messes up Arlong, Don Krieg, or even Alvida's number. Alvida. So this does not bode well for Kuro's ranking. The fact that the anime and the movie production staff can't even be bothered enough with him to get his facts right. However, what I personally like about Kuro is that he's a bit of a beta test for CP9. The idea of a competent agent with an ulterior motive spending literally years on an island to implement and execute a mission. He even kind of has access to one of the Rokushiki techniques, which he calls Nugiashi, meaning stealth foot, although certain translations decide to call it the pussyfoot maneuver, which makes Kuro sound like the villain of a Broadway musical. And it's never been confirmed, but this technique is shockingly similar to Soru. And I suspect that Captain Kuro may have accidentally learned a version of Soru. I also think that Kuro actually does a great job of appearing empathetic when he has his talk with Kaya, and he reminisces on how good her family has been to him. This sort of deception is fantastic, because seeing that for the first time did make me question if I was wrong about him. Maybe he is just a good dude after all, with some flaws. And I think it's important to give Kuro that credit, because he had me fooled for all of 2 pages, because shortly thereafter, Oda goes ahead and reveals that he is in fact the big villain man, and we were right to suspect him all along. And I do think that a modern Eiichiro Oda might have implemented this twist a lot better, like he did with CP9. I mean, imagine if the first time we met Lucci as a carpenter at GLR, and then 3 pages later he's on a Den Mushi, revealing that he's the main antagonist of the entire saga. Wouldn't have hit quite as hard. So I'd love to see a version of Syrup Village where Kuro being the villain is revealed later on, and maybe we're led to suspect that Django is the main antagonist. But then again, that does kind of mess with Usopp's whole story of knowing and telling everyone, but them not believing him, so I'm just going to leave that on the table for now, and we're going to discuss motivation, because Kuro has what I think is the most unique motivation of any East Blue villain. When you consider the likes of Alvida, Buggy, Don Krieg, and Arlong, they're all focused on the big picture of acquiring wealth, fame, and power to implement their evil agendas. And what I love about Kuro is that he's the exact opposite. He's doing everything he can to disappear and retire from piracy. What he seeks is essentially what Luffy wants. He wants freedom. And he's also quite similar to Mihawk. Kuro wants to live a peaceful life and is sick and tired of being hunted by the Marines. He even goes on to say, "What good are riches if you've always got the Marines chasing you?" And I think the quest for a quiet life is a very underutilized idea in One Piece. And with Kuro, it actually plays into his relationship with Usopp. Usopp and Kuro represent 2 opposing ideas in this arc, being pride and shame. Usopp, a man who has never gone out to sea, is proud to be the son of a pirate and holds that as the pinnacle of honor. And it's his goal to go on and become that brave warrior of the sea. Meanwhile, Kuro, a man who is an actual piracy veteran, is disgusted to so much as be associated with the word. He's ashamed of what he was, and he is willing to do absolutely anything to erase that part of his life. It's like having a pair of hands so dirty that no amount of washing will ever clean them. Kuro says, "Ouch, damn spot," but then the damn spot says, "Lol, you mad, bro?" And Kuro is genuinely antagonistic towards Usopp, and the reason for that isn't because Kuro's a bad dude, it's because Usopp is the son of a pirate. Kuro has such a deep disgust of his previous profession, and he's projecting that onto Usopp, who holds that profession in the highest regard. And there's one very very telling interaction where Kuro even states that Usopp has a gift for deceit and that he wouldn't put anything past him, that filthy pirate-loving man, which is classic projection, because Kuro is the one with the gift for deceit and plans on doing all of the really bad things. He calls Usopp trash, he calls his father filthy, he calls both of them animals, but it's all projection, especially since Kuro's entire crew are themed on animals. So Kuro hates Usopp because Usopp is a reflection of what he hates being. Kuro even says that Kaya's estate is no place for someone like him, when what he means to say is that it's no place for someone like him, which I know is the same sentence, but the hims imply different people. Now, speaking of different people, Kuro is actually two people, and not a lot of readers pick up on that, which is a shame because to me, this forms the most compelling part of his persona. There's even one point where he says, Captain Kuro has outlived his usefulness, as if he literally wants to become another person, which he does with his butler persona Klahadore. And it makes you wonder if Kuro was even his original identity or just another alias that he took on and became at one stage, because he does make efforts to completely transform himself right down to the basic use of language, which I will admit is a lot less apparent in English, but in Japanese there is a distinct difference between when Kuro is talking and when Klahadore is talking. It's like listening to two different people through simple choices, such as Kuro using the pronoun ore and Klahadore using watashi, which in English can both only be translated as I, but in Japanese this simple choice tells you a lot about a person. And more evidently in English, you can tell the difference whenever Kuro or Klahadore talk about death. Kuro is very blunt and refers to it as killing, whereas Klahadore, the pacifist, would never use such wicked terminology. No, he says accident. And this is another very important detail that people miss. Kuro himself claims to have become a pacifist, or actually I should say that Klahadore claims this, which is odd because we see him very willingly harm people later on, but that's because this is Kuro acting, not Klahadore. And we know that he's not just acting, he's not just playing pretend, because he tells Django that he's become a pacifist. He tells Django alone. There was no reason to lie about that to Django. If anything, hearing that your captain has become a pacifist might even undermine your faith in him. So Kuro actually believes that he's capable of becoming a different person. But having said that, I don't think this is portrayed as clearly or as powerfully as it could have been. But look, arguably the most compelling aspect of this Captain Kuro is that he's a super genius whose plans are all catered right down to the most minor of details. Kuro is a different type of villain in many ways, but he's the first intellectual antagonist that we encounter, by which I mean it's not so much his strength that we fear, but his mind brain. He's introduced to us as Kuro of 100 plans, a master strategist with an eye for excruciating detail. And Eiichiro Oda even once stated that Captain Kuro was one of the top 3 smartest people within the entire East Blue saga, with the other 2 being Ben Beckman and Nami. And this is all very threatening because Luffy can't deal with that kind of opponent. He's built for rubber fist fights, not pirate chess, which in theory makes Kuro the most dangerous opponent to date, provided that he can make good on said intelligence. But that brings us to the problem of writing genius characters. If you choose to do this, then as an author, you need to work overtime to make sure that these characters are always several steps ahead of the audience. Not just the in-world characters. You need to have the audience believe that this 2D fictional character is smarter than them, the 3-dimensional humans. And it also leaves these kind of characters much more open to scrutiny. Because if Kuro of 100 plans has a plan that he's been planning for 3 years, and then there's a problem with the plan, then that's going to shatter the illusion of genius. But this is what I think most people get wrong about Captain Kuro. He was never a genius. He was a big-brained fish in a very small-brained pond. He is the sharpest of the dullest, the brightest of the dim, and all of the other metaphors. You get the idea. But Kuro has deluded himself into thinking that he's a genius. And it's really interesting because throughout Syrup Village, his intelligence is constantly being questioned by Django. Right from the get-go, Django tells Kuro that he wasn't sure about this whole plan thing, and then later on, when Kuro lets Usopp go after overhearing the plan, Django throws this failure back in Kuro's face when it ends up becoming a big problem. But Kuro is completely unable to accept his own mistake and insists that he was correct all along and that this is somehow Django's fault. Kuro is the most frustrating kind of person. A man who cannot face his own mistakes and can somehow contort his way out of any personal responsibility. He never makes mistakes. The mistakes are made by everyone around him. That is Captain Kuro at every step during this arc. Even right at the end, when his plans are obviously falling apart, he insists that the plan was perfect. But his plan sucked! Not just when it fell apart, right from the inception. When speaking about his own plan, Kuro says, "There's no room for error in my 3-year plan, and my plans never go off course. So no room for error except the following. 1. This plan relies entirely on Django and the Black Cat Pirates actually returning after 3 years when they could easily peace out and go do their own thing. 2. This plan relies on the Black Cat pirates not being caught by the Marines for 3 years. 3, instead of spending the 3 years gaining the trust of the villagers, Kuro could have just had Django hypnotize them, because there's no need for acting when you can control people's minds. And in that case, you don't even need to attack the village or risk drawing any unwanted attention at all. Especially since 4, Kuro got stupidly, and I mean stupidly lucky, with Kaya's parents dying without his involvement. And then with Kaya herself going on to become a very sickly girl, again without his involvement. Kuro did not kill the parents, Kuro did not poison Kaya. I mean, he did poison Kaya in the live action, but not in the actual manga. Kuro didn't do anything except for keeping a very well kept house. So if he just infiltrated and gotten Kaya to pass away from something that looked like a natural condition, then no one would have raised any suspicion. 5, why not get Kaya to write the will a bit earlier than the morning of her accidental death, perhaps even a year or 2 in advance, because nothing is less suspicious than a fresh will written hours before death. Furthermore, he didn't even need Django to hypnotize Kaya into writing the will, he just needed to threaten her, which is ultimately what ends up happening. Kaya writes the will without Django's powers. 6, and this is a big one, when Usopp discovers the plan, Kuro lets him go, allowing Usopp to form the resistance that stops Django and the crew, which we've discussed. Then 7, instead of simply accepting the anniversary gift, Kuro decides to out himself, kill in quotations Mary, and then at that point of compromise. There was no reason for him to do this. All he needed to do was keep up the act until dawn, but no, he initiated the plan the night before the plan was meant to commence, which is especially bad because somehow, number 8, Kuro fails to actually kill Mary, which then alerts Kaya to his betrayal, which is terribly out of character for someone who we are told is so detail-oriented. It's not out of character, it is his character. And if you don't believe me, then number 9, before the Black Cat pirates are able to sack the village, which remember was the plan, Kuro attempts to slaughter each and every one of them, thus preventing them from enacting the plan. Masterful gambit, sir. His perfect plan needed them to take the fall, so what you gonna do now? Stroll into the village and kill a bunch of residents yourself? In which case, why bother spending 3 years to gain their trust? It was completely unnecessary. In the end, he starts killing his crew and abandoning his own plan, whilst insisting that his plan is still the perfect plan. And in the end, I personally don't get a lot of satisfaction out of beating Kuro because we did not beat Kuro. Kuro beat Kuro. And apart from faking his own death, which was a genuinely cool, well thought out plan, I'll give him that. But apart from that, at no point does Kuro take the smartest and most carefully considered options. And he also leaves far too much up to chance, which is why the most generous analysis I can give this character is that Kuro was a man who thought he was smart, and that unearned belief in himself is what caused his undoing. But I need to admit, I don't know if that's just me trying to find an excuse for the character, because even if that is the intention, then I don't think Oda nailed it. I think that Captain Kuro as a whole comes across as a weakly written character, a genius stereotype that was used by an author who was perhaps a bit too young to really understand how a character like that needs to be implemented. And that choice harms him greatly. Kuro was set up to be this intellectual force to be reckoned with, which both raises the stakes but also significantly raises expectations. If Kuro wasn't introduced as a genius and instead he was just some guy of, middling intelligence who wanted to do some really bad things, then no one would scrutinize him anywhere near as harshly as he gets. Or if it was made super clear that his genius was a facade all along and then all of the mistakes, they become believable, you could even thematically tie that to Usopp, because he's also a notorious liar with no substance to back up the stories he's telling, and maybe we could have done a parallel story with Kuro to show that he's a liar who claims to be a genius in the same way that Usopp claims to be a brave warrior of the sea. And then Usopp could have seen how hollow Kuro was and used that as part of his reason to set out to sea and make his lie a reality. But we can't really have that because Kuro can actually back himself up, as he does have the strength and intelligence required to get to this middling point of, not genius but smarter than average, and quite competent but also stupid at times guy man. So in the end, I don't really know what to do with Kuro, and neither did Oda, because he has no resolution. Luffy beats him, we see his body fall onto the floor, and then nothing. Although anime watchers will know that in episode 45, we do see Kuro one last time, having resumed his role as a pirate. However, this did not happen in the manga, and anything about Kuro after his defeat is completely unknown. He wasn't arrested because there were no Marines there, and in the live action, he's seen sailing away in a rowboat because I think that even they recognize that Kuro needed some sort of resolution, or at least a hanging thread of potential. And now Kuro is one of the only villains in all of One Piece who has never appeared again, which, good on him, because I guess that means he got his wish. Kuro was able to disappear from the story and not get caught up in cover stories and future events because he's completely off the radar. He could be off somewhere or else implementing another 3, 4, maybe even 5-year plan that we have yet to see come to fruition because the entire story of One Piece so far hasn't even covered 3 years. It might be a case where at the very end of One Piece, Oda shows us a single panel of Kuro having successfully achieved his retirement, but also it's entirely possible that we never see Kuro again, and I personally have no expectation to. Or I should say I had no expectation to, because Kuro does appear in a gag one-shot called My Plans Never Fail by Ryo Nakama. And this was a promotional 5-page manga to tie into One Piece Stampede, where it is revealed that Kuro has retired in a small house somewhere, and for some reason still wears his butler outfit, I guess fully taking on the persona of Klahadore. But in any case, he receives an invitation to the Pirates Festival and decides to call his old buddy Django, who is now a Marine, and it ends with Kuro getting really angry and destroying all of his furniture. So this is a non-canon tie into a non-canon film, but despite that, I think this actually shows Kuro in his purest form, which is a deluded man who thinks he's an intellectual and belongs at the peak of humanity, but who is in reality a very small man who meets an equally small end. That's how I choose to view Kuro, because if he is meant to be everything he says he is, then Oda simply failed. And Kuro becomes a very rare example of a character who falls short of the hype built up by the author. But either way, I think that Kuro was the kind of character that East Blue was not quite ready to tackle. The simplicity of early One Piece was not a good canvas for this sort of figure, and Oda has since gone on to implement hyper-intelligent antagonists very, very well. So perhaps Kuro stealth walked so that characters like Crocodile and Rob Lucci could stealth run. And whilst Kuro does have some genuinely interesting ideas, most of them aren't fully baked, and in the grand scheme of One Piece villains, I really don't think I can award him more than a D tier. But you let me know in the comments which villain you'd like to see ranked next.